Let's see what it does. Oh boy, look at that!
Did you know that some of the ugliest cars in history were born in the 1970s? Despite being a decade known for innovation, the 70s also produced a collection of cars so ugly that they've become automotive legends for all the wrong reasons. Join us in this video as we take a look at the 20 ugliest cars from the 70s. Number 1. AMC Gremlin. What do you get when you take a compact car, chop off its back end, and give it a distinctive, dare we say, charming look? The AMC Gremlin, of course. Released at the height of the subcompact car boom in the early 1970s, the Gremlin was America's answer to the fuel-efficient, budget-friendly cars of the time. And oh boy, was it a strange answer. The car looked like a hatchback that was simultaneously a little too short and a little too wide for its own good. The Gremlin had a front end that was all business, if by business you mean a simple, plain Jane front grille and boxy headlights. If the front of the car was ordinary, the back was a comically overemphasized whoops, we ran out of ideas. With that exaggerated, jarring hatchback design, it looked like someone cut a conventional car in half and then patched it back together without much care for symmetry. It's hard to ignore the Gremlin's odd proportions, like a baby's toy car that somehow grew to life size. At just over 12 feet long, the Gremlin was incredibly compact for its era, but it still felt awkwardly big and blocky compared to rival imports like the Honda Civic. Its peculiar rear window had a weird sloping angle, contributing to a shape that was both odd and unbalanced. Number 2. Ford Pinto.
Beautiful. Alright, let's start her up.
The Ford Pinto is, without a doubt, a car that leaves a lasting impression. The Pinto was Ford's attempt to take on the subcompact market, and on the surface it looked like any other small car of the era. But what it became known for is something entirely different, a legacy of fire, explosions, and the kind of design flaws that haunt a car's reputation long after it's gone. Yes, the Pinto was ugly, but its legacy is defined by something far worse: controversy. The Pinto had all the visual appeal of a low-budget compact. Its round headlights, chunky grille, and simple lines gave it a bland appearance. If a car could look pedestrian, the Pinto nailed it. It wasn't particularly striking in any way, with its boxy rear end and long front hood, but there was something charmingly plain about it. Yet that plainness also made it look like a prototype that never quite made it past the let's just get it on the road stage. The proportions were just a little too square, the rear end too abrupt. It was as if Ford tried to give the car a sporty look by shortening the body, but all they did was create a vehicle that looked wrong. Despite its practical design and reasonable price point, the Pinto became infamous for its poor safety record. The problem? Its gas tank, located behind the rear axle, was prone to exploding in the event of a rear-end collision. For years, the Pinto was the subject of lawsuits, congressional hearings, and public outrage. But beyond that, the Pinto's design was about as bland and uninspired as it gets. Inside, the Pinto had a bare-bones approach to everything, from the simple dashboard to the minimalistic features. Sure, it was affordable, but at what cost? Number 3. Aston Martin Lagonda Series 1.
Aston Martin Lagonda, the most shocking car in the world in 1976, and to my mind, still the most shocking in 2003.
When you think of Aston Martin, you probably picture a sleek, polished sports car, maybe even one that James Bond would zip around in while evading death. The Aston Martin Lagonda? It's a whole different story. The first glance at the Aston Martin Lagonda Series 1 is likely to leave you, well, confused. It looks like someone took a 1970 sports car and decided to make it awkward. The front end has this long, narrow, almost rectangular grille, flanked by sharp, angular headlights that look like they belong to a spaceship rather than a luxury sedan. The body is boxy, with a strange combination of curves and hard edges. If you squint, you might see the faintest resemblance to an elegant sedan. But let's be real, the Lagonda's design doesn't so much invoke elegance as it does a strange and alienating complexity. The Lagonda was essentially a luxury car trying desperately to appear modern, yet somehow it looked outdated from the moment it hit the streets. Number 4. AMC Pacer.
Well, look at this beauty. 76 Pacer. You don't see these around anymore. What a beautiful example of a classic AMC car. Nice.
The Pacer, which debuted in 1975, was a car that took the term distinctive to a whole new level. With its bizarre shape and large, bubble-like windows, it's a vehicle that was either ahead of its time or completely out of it. The Pacer was marketed as the car of the future, but instead it became one of the most iconic and often mocked designs in automotive history. The first thing you'll notice about the AMC Pacer is the oversized, nearly panoramic side windows. The Pacer looked like someone took a standard sedan and stretched the windows to an absurd degree. Its circular, bulging form, especially at the rear, gave it a fishbowl look that was simply unlike anything else on the road. The car was wide for its size, which combined with its awkwardly short length made it appear strange. The front end was somewhat standard for the time. Rounded headlights, small grille, and a basic bumper. The awkward features of the Pacer were almost too many to count. First off, there were those giant windows that were, in theory, supposed to make the cabin feel spacious. In reality, they made the car look a bit out of proportion. The car's body was wide and squat, which gave it a slightly overinflated look. And then, of course, there was the fact that the Pacer was one of the first cars to feature a two-door design, with asymmetrical doors. That's right, one door on the driver's side was normal-sized, while the passenger side had a larger, almost comically massive door. This strange feature was meant to give rear passengers easier access to the back seat, but instead it just made the car look lopsided. Number 5. Bricklin SV1.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's pretty cool, man. I like that. What is this right here?
That's how you open and close the doors.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's badass.
The Bricklin SV1 is a car that promised much but ultimately delivered little more than confusion and mechanical failures. It was supposed to be the American answer to the growing demand for safe, stylish sports cars. What it ended up being, however, was one of the most confusing and least loved cars to ever grace the streets. The Bricklin SV1, at first glance, is a bizarre-looking vehicle. The gull-wing doors, which gave the car a certain vibe, also added to the awkwardness of its design. The body was an odd mix of sharp, angular lines with smooth, curved sections, an unbalanced combination that felt like two styles collided and couldn't decide on a direction. The front end, with its wide grille and unusually flat face, looked odd. The rear end was just as awkward, with a shape that felt out of proportion with the rest of the car. Despite its attempts to appear sleek, the Bricklin ended up looking more like a prototype that never quite made it out of the drawing board. The car's overall design was riddled with flaws. For starters, the fiberglass body panels were notoriously brittle, often cracking under the slightest pressure. Additionally, the SV1 suffered from a series of mechanical issues, especially with its engine and electrical systems. A car meant to represent the future of automotive safety and style ended up being a lesson in unfulfilled potential. Number 6. Chevrolet Chevette.
1976 Chevrolet Chevette. When the gas crunch happened, all the American manufacturers had to do something, and they were freaking out. We gotta do something! And here it is. This is the solution. It's something. I wasn't kidding about the non-serviceable air cleaner. It really was one gigantic piece of metal you were supposed to throw out.
The Chevrolet Chevette was designed to be the ultimate in affordability. But let's be real. If cars were given personality traits, the Chevette would be the one with no sense of style, no jokes, and no care for the dramatic. The Chevette was a boxy, functional hatchback that, while practical, was a design nightmare. Its square shape had all the elegance of a cardboard box. No curves, no finesse, just utilitarian lines and a bit of cheap trim. The front of the car featured a standard grille and small headlights, while the rear was just as uninspired, with a simple hatchback design that screamed, "I'm here to get the job done, not look good doing it." The car's proportions were bland. It was neither sporty nor sleek. It was just there, an automotive appliance that did its job without calling attention to itself. The Chevette's features were as basic as a car could get. The interior was sparse, with hard plastic surfaces, rudimentary controls, and seats that were about as comfortable as sitting on a park bench. Number 7. Triumph TR7.
TR7. It tracks as straight as a laser. Peeling back the top reveals a roomy and striking interior. This is one of the great remaining bargains. Motor trend. With several thousand miles on the clock, the TR7 convertible still felt tight and solid. All things considered, it's an exhilarating car to drive.
Triumph's TR7, introduced in 1974, was supposed to be the British sports car company's bold leap into the future. Instead, it was a baffling departure from the brand's more classic, curvaceous designs, bringing forth a sharp wedge-shaped vehicle that left many shocked. The TR7 was an attempt to combine the fun of a sports car with the efficiency of a compact, but its angular design and mixed reception left it with a legacy that is, shall we say, complicated. First thing you notice about the TR7 is its wedge-shaped body. Gone were the graceful curves of earlier Triumph models. Instead, you got angular, blocky lines that made the car look more like a prototype of a future car that got stuck in the 1970s. The rear was just as strange, with its sloping trunk and short, abrupt rear overhang. The headlights, which hid behind a retractable cover, felt like they belonged on a science fiction movie set rather than a real car. The design was meant to be futuristic, but it ended up looking more like a failed concept car, like it had been left to bake in the hot sun a little too long. Number 8. 1974 Sebring Vanguard City Car.
Downhill.
Do reverse. What? Do reverse. You flip the switch. Oh, you're not hooked up to the switch?
The 1970s saw a push for eco-friendly urban cars that would meet the growing demand for efficient, affordable vehicles. The Sebring Vanguard City Car looked like a golf cart that was trying to be something more. While the city car was innovative in its own right, it was not exactly easy on the eyes. If you ever wondered what it would be like to drive a plastic box, the city car might just be your answer. The city car was small, with an angular, plastic body that looked more like a toy than a legitimate car. It had a very short wheelbase and was designed to be driven around urban environments, but its aesthetic was not so great. It featured large, clunky fenders, an odd bubble-like shape, and a design that made it look like it had been made by a high school student for a class project. It wasn't sleek, nor was it stylish. It was, in a word, bizarre. The city car's quirks were numerous. It was an electric vehicle, which was ahead of its time in the 1970s, but the car itself had very little going for it beyond that. Its top speed was only 40 miles per hour, which made it more suitable for running errands than for actual road trips. The car was also prone to battery issues and offered minimal comfort. With a sparse interior and basic features, its odd design made it hard to take seriously, even if it did have a certain appeal. Number 9. Dodge Aspen.
A 1977 Dodge Aspen RT. This car is just too freaking cool.
The Dodge Aspen had everything going for it. Well, at least in theory. Chrysler wanted to make a compact family car, and they did. But they didn't quite think it through. The result was a vehicle that looked as if it was created in a rush, with design choices that seemed disconnected and mechanical problems that made it a poor investment for families. If the 1970s was a wild time for automotive design, the Dodge Aspen might just be the awkward teenager trying to find its identity. The Dodge Aspen was a compact car with a rather standard, forgettable design. It had a boxy shape with a typical 70s front-end grille and small, beady headlights. The rear end was equally uninspired, with a bland trunk and nothing about it that would have turned heads. If you were hoping for something memorable in the looks department, the Aspen was a letdown. It was the type of car that looked like it was built to blend in with the crowd, not stand out. Number 10. 1973 Reliant Robin. The Reliant Robin is perhaps one of the most famous cars in the UK for all the wrong reasons. It became a symbol of comedy and misfortune, mainly because it tends to flip over at the slightest turn. The three-wheeled wonder was cheap, economical, and designed to be a simple utility car, but it earned notoriety for its inherent instability. It was the car that everyone loved to laugh at, and with good reason. The Reliant Robin was a tiny three-wheeled car with a body so narrow it made other compact cars look like SUVs. Its design was awkward, with a rounded front end and rear section that was remarkably unremarkable. But the real problem was the three-wheel setup. With only one wheel in the front, the Robin was unstable at best. It was top-heavy, prone to tipping over during tight turns, or when hitting bumps. It looked like a toy car, and in many ways it drove like one too. Unstable, underpowered, and awkward. Number 11. Subaru 360. Before Subaru became known for rugged all-wheel drive vehicles, they had a decidedly less adventurous start with the Subaru 360. This tiny bubble-shaped car was a product of post-war Japan, and while it might have made sense as a solution for crowded streets in Tokyo, it certainly didn't have the aesthetic appeal to match its practical intentions. The 360 became one of the most unusual and awkward vehicles of the 1970s. The Subaru 360 was a microcar, with a design that looked almost cartoonish compared to the cars of its time. With its tiny frame, round body, and tiny wheels, the 360 was often compared to a toy car for adults. Its bubble-like roofline and short, stubby front end made it look like something out of a children's cartoon, and its narrow width made it look unstable, though it was actually quite nimble for its size. Inside, it was just as cramped, offering minimal legroom and seating for just 4 adults, if they were really small. Number 12. 1970 Saab Sonnet 3. The 1970 Saab Sonnet 3 was a car that didn't quite understand what it wanted to be. It looked sporty but felt too strange to ever be considered a true performance vehicle. It was also compact, yet it lacked the elegance and sophistication that other small European cars of the era offered. Saab, known for its eccentric designs, took a swing at creating a roadster. But what came out was something that felt more like a child's idea of a sports car. Cute, weird, and a bit misguided. The Sonnet 3 was a low-slung two-door sports car with a fiberglass body that featured odd curves and sharp angles. Its design was distinctly Saab, quirky and unconventional. The front end was dominated by a large grille, while the back had a somewhat bulbous rear that wasn't entirely flattering. It was small, almost cartoonish in its proportions, and despite its sporty pretensions, it looked more like a toy car than a serious contender. The Sonnet 3 also featured some unique design touches, including a rear engine hatch that didn't always close properly, and an interior that felt more like an afterthought than a place to enjoy driving. Despite its low weight, it lacked the precise handling and performance that many of its contemporaries had. Number 13. Chrysler Cordoba.
Man, this is literally the best car ever I've ever seen.
The Chrysler Cordoba was supposed to be Chrysler's answer to the luxury compact car, but instead of offering refinement and class, it was more like the automotive equivalent of a velvet curtain, slightly gaudy and full of excess. The Cordoba was designed to be sleek and elegant, but in reality it came across more like an awkward socialite trying too hard to impress. With its hefty design and heavy resilience on plush materials, it looked like the car you might find in a 1970s movie, where everyone's trying to look important, but no one's really pulling it off. The Cordoba was a mid-sized car that was quite the departure from Chrysler's usual offerings. Its exterior was long and heavy, with a pronounced front end that featured a prominent grille and thin headlights. The rear end had a slightly rounded, squared-off design that felt both outdated and excessive for the time. But what truly set the Cordoba apart was its interior. Velvet seats and wood trim were meant to evoke a sense of sophistication. Instead, it felt like Chrysler was trying too hard to offer luxury on a budget. But in doing so, they created a car that just came off as tacky. Number 14. Buick Skyhawk.
You're free, inside you're free after all. You hear freedom spirit, like a wild bird's call.
The Buick Skyhawk was a car that tried its best to be sporty, but ended up looking like the awkward cousin at a family reunion. It was as if Buick tried to design something cool and forgot to ask anyone under the age of 60 for their opinion. So it was neither truly youthful nor luxurious. It was simply there. The Skyhawk was a compact car, but it didn't really have the sleek, sporty look it aspired to. With its small body, low stance, and angular lines, the Skyhawk looked a little too plain to be taken seriously as a performance car. It didn't have the pizzazz of its competitors, like the Chevrolet Camaro or the Ford Mustang, but it was trying to. The design felt like a mishmash of ideas, with an awkward blend of 70s style cues that didn't quite make sense in the end. The result was a forgettable car that blended in with the crowd, and was soon lost in the sea of compact cars. Number 15. Ford Maverick. The Ford Maverick was a car that you might have heard of, but probably wouldn't give a second glance. It was Ford's answer to the compact car trend of the 1970s, and while it was affordable, it lacked any significant charm to make it memorable. Think of it as the plain toast of the automotive world. Nothing too exciting, but something that did the job without making a fuss. The Maverick had a simple design. It wasn't trying to be flashy or sporty, which, to be fair, was its strength in a market filled with over-the-top muscle cars. The front grille was basic with a simple, unobtrusive design. The rest of the body was boxy and unremarkable, without any real defining features. The car had a distinct 70s vibe. That wasn't enough to make it stand out. If anything, the Maverick looked like a vehicle made to blend in, without anything particularly special about it. Number 16. 1970 Ford Thunderbird. The 1970 version of the Thunderbird felt like a giant trying too hard to maintain its youthful, flashy edge. The result was a car that's just as awkward as it sounds. The 1970 Thunderbird had an overly large, rounded shape that made it look like a whale on wheels. It was as wide as some small streets and long enough to make parallel parking a workout. The front end was dominated by an expansive grille, an elongated hood, while the rear featured a bulky design with wide fenders. It wasn't so much a luxury coupe as it was a behemoth of excess, a car that looked like it wanted to eat smaller cars for breakfast. Despite its massive size, the interior didn't even match the grandeur of its exterior, offering plush materials but nothing that screamed refinement. The Thunderbird's awkward features were evident in its awkward proportions and overly dramatic styling. It felt like the car had grown up but still tried to dress in high school fashion, with no sense of maturity. The back seat, designed to accommodate more passengers, ended up feeling cavernous and empty, highlighting the unnecessary space that could have been used more effectively. Number 17. 1970 Porsche 914.
Yeah.
The 1970 Porsche 914 is a curious entry in Porsche's lineup. It was an entry-level model that Porsche hoped would attract new buyers, but it ended up being an oddball in the brand's catalog. The 914 was a product of a collaboration between Porsche and Volkswagen, which gave you an idea of where this model was headed. Despite its mid-engine design and good handling, the 914 just never seemed to fit with Porsche's reputation for luxury and performance. The 914's design was odd. It had a flat, angular body that made it look like a Volkswagen Beetle had been stretched and modified. It was smaller than most Porsches, with a stubby look that didn't convey the elegance or prestige one would expect from the brand. The rear end was especially unflattering, with a clunky, boxy design that was more Volkswagen than Porsche. While it had the heart of a sports car, its looks didn't exactly inspire excitement. Number 18. 1973 Leyland P76. The Leyland P76 is a classic case of big dreams, bad execution. Designed to compete with Australian icons like the Ford Falcon and Holden Kingswood, this car had ambition, but failed spectacularly. Its design was a strange mix of bloated, slab-sided panels and a flat, uninspiring front end. The grille looked like it had been borrowed from a filing cabinet, and the headlights were so plain they might as well have come from a hardware store. What really killed the P76 aesthetically was its proportion. The car was wide, really wide, but oddly short in height, giving it a squat, awkward stance. The rear end was no better, with a trunk lid so massive that Leyland proudly advertised it could fit a 44-gallon drum inside. Practical, sure. Beautiful, not even close. Number 19. 1975 British Leyland Princess.
Princess was an attempt by the British car maker to marry the size and comfort of a large family car with the exceptional ride quality of the tried-and-tested Hydrogas suspension system.
The British Leyland Princess, nicknamed the Wedge of Cheese by many, was the result of trying way too hard to follow the wedge-shaped design craze of the 1970s. Unfortunately, it ended up looking more like a doorstop than a car. The Princess's angular design was supposed to be modern and cutting edge, but instead came off as ungainly and unfinished. The front end featured awkwardly inset headlights flanking a barely there grille that seemed like an afterthought. The steeply sloping roofline gave it a weirdly stretched look, making the car appear as if it was permanently hunched over. The rear end was another disaster, the bulging trunk and taillights that seemed comically undersized for such a wide car. The back looked like it belonged to an entirely different vehicle. It didn't help that British Leyland thought it would be clever to ditch a rear hatch, leaving buyers with a saloon that looked like it should have been practical but wasn't. Combined with frequent mechanical issues and British Leyland's reputation for shoddy assembly, the Princess was ugly inside and out. Number 20. Van den Plas 1500.
A Jaguar X-Type. Well, it's just a Mondeo with a Jag badge, mate. Honda NSX. Do you know Ayrton Senna developed that? No, he didn't. The Austin Allegro. Oh, those rust and they got square steering wheels. Well, I hate to tell you, not only do these not actually rust that badly, this one doesn't have a square steering wheel, nor is it in fact even an Austin Allegro. This is a Van den Plas 1500.
The Van den Plas 1500 is proof that no amount of fake luxury can disguise a fundamentally ugly car. Based on the Austin Allegro, often called one of the worst cars of all time, this upmarket version managed to somehow look even worse. The Allegro's jelly bean-like proportions were already unflattering, but the addition of a comically oversized chrome grille only made things worse. The grille, meant to give a classic British luxury vibe, looked hilariously out of place on the car's stubby front end. It was like putting a top hat on a pug. The Van den Plas also suffered from terrible proportions. The roofline was too rounded, the body was too short, and the car's track width was too narrow, making it look like it was wobbling on stilts. The addition of fake wood trim and leather upholstery inside was supposed to elevate the car's image, but instead it felt like a cheap attempt to dress up a disaster. Is there any car you think should have made the list? Let us know down in the comments section below. And don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video.